Sometimes we're just spunky. Hey, thank you for joining the Escape With Me Book Club. Escape with me, Sam Reiner.
And me, James Reiner.
Into our most recent read. Come with us as we evade reality and go into detail about a new book. We'll be covering the book from beginning to end, so there will be spoilers. Today we are going to 1327 Italy.
Yay!
Time travel. Published 1980. The Name of the Rose is the debut novel for Italian novelist Umberto
Eco, I believe. I do not know how to pronounce Italian, but I'm pretty sure the last name spelled E-C-O is pronounced Eco.
Oh dear, your Italian family is going to hate us again. It would go on to be translated into English in 1983 by William Weaver. 3 years later, the film of the same name would premiere with lead actor Sean Connery. What was this tale that took the world by storm? And how does it hold up 40 years later? Okay, so this was a you pick. How in the world did you find this? Because you didn't find this years and years and years ago and just had it in your library. You very recently, in the past couple of years, searched for it at used bookstores and found it.
Yeah, I did, didn't I? You're going to laugh. I was watching a Watch Mojo.
Fair.
I can't remember which one. I think it was something about like underappreciated mystery movies, detective movies or something, or underappreciated historical movies that are really cool that represent kind of the time. I can't remember which Watch Mojo was, but I watched it, and one of the movies they suggested was The Name of the Rose. And they're like, yeah, it has Sean Connery and Christian Slater, and it not only is it set in 14th century Europe at a abbot monastery. Abbey, thank you. But it's also a mystery. I was like, oh, a mystery. And set in 14th century Europe, that sounds interesting. And it mentioned the movie was based off a book. And I was like, I really want to go find this book. So I searched out this book. I found it. I knew it was about monks. I knew it was about a murder mystery. I knew it was about books. I really like books. So I decided to read it. And I really enjoyed it.
There we go. You read the book before you watched the movie, too.
I did. Well, what was annoying is I read the book and I couldn't find the movie for the longest time. It was very niche. It's not going to be at any thrift movie store. It wasn't streaming on anything at the time. So it was very frustrating. It's like, I really want to watch the movie. And then finally it popped up on Amazon Prime. So I was finally able to watch it. So that was nice. And I enjoyed the movie, too.
That explains a lot, actually.
As I said, I thought it followed the book very closely. But as we found out when we watched it together, I am terribly, terribly wrong.
It makes so much more sense that you were like, oh yeah, it hit all the high points.
It was very faithful to the book. And you watch it and be like, that's not right. That's not right. That's different. That's suspicious.
The ending is completely different.
It's not completely. The library still burns down.
Who dies and who doesn't die changes a lot.
I know. And we'll get to that. Let's not spoil too much.
But that explains a lot that it took you a bit to find the movie.
Yes, it did.
Age level, this is an adult book.
It is. It would bore children to death.
That too, but it's also very dark.
It is dark.
And just out of pocket sometimes.
It has plenty of adult themes.
Including, for the content warning,
yay!
Animal cruelty and death, sex, both mentioned and implied, religious persecution, gore, death of a child mentioned, murder, suicide, blood, incest mentioned, rape mentioned, cannibalism mentioned, torture, sexism, nudity, language, kidnapping, and fire destruction.
Yes.
That long line of mentioned was just because this random monk was like, let me tell you about these devil worshippers. And then just says the most out-of-pocket nonsense. Oh my goodness.
Not devil work, but heretics, people who rebelled against the church.
Not even devil worshippers. Oh gosh.
But yes, the Dulcinites, they were very, very brutal, very eat the rich. So
they were. But there was also him accusing other people and it's like, oh, they go in their basements and they do blah, 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 blah. And then they do this, this, and this. And you're just, what?
Yeah, there is an inquisitioner that comes and accuses a lot of stuff.
Oh, I'm talking about Umberto, the guy that freaks me out a little bit, honestly. William's friend.
Oh, yeah.
He's the one that goes on some really out-of-pocket rants.
Well, he's a bit old, a bit out there, a bit creepy. Really hits on the young Adso monk.
Yeah.
And you're like, this is creepy.
Yeah. I'm trying to think about how to nicely say that they're mean about gay people.
Yeah, I mean, it is a bunch of Catholic monks.
Honestly, anything that a stereotypical Catholic monk would be against, they are very mean about it. So everything that you can think of that would be in there is.
Because this is the height of the Middle Ages. The 14th century was a big turning point because we're on the cusp of the Renaissance and humanism infiltrating Europe. So this is the height of what some people term the Dark Ages, height of religious influence and stuff like that. So it kind of makes sense. You got the epitome of what is corrupt and wrong about the whole system being put on display.
And so if you were picking up this book and you were thinking, this looks like fun, but you are not prepared for any of those topics, put it back down. Maybe watch the movie.
If you're not prepared for in-depth postmodern theory, you should put the book down.
If you're not ready for in-depth how women are just naturally the worst things ever, put the book down.
I don't know what you expect with an entire book based on monks in a monastery in the middle of 14th century. I mean, of course, they're going to be like,
not as many rants as I got.
women are the devil. They're so evil and full of sin, and you just got to avoid them.
Yeah, it's pretty rough.
The best way to avoid them is sleep with me, is the implication the old monks keep giving.
Oh my gosh, it's a whole thing.
It's a whole thing. Not the main thing. We're getting sidetracked by little, like, what? WTF moments in the books.
He does rant sometimes, and you're just like, where did this come from?
Yes, but it's not overall important to the actual theme of the book. It's little WTF aside moments. Like, did he just hit on that young monk?
Yeah.
Did he just go on and on for pages about the end of the world?
Yeah.
And then back to the main murder plot.
Several pages of this demonic door.
It was just a few pages. I thought the movie did a good job portraying that. So anyways, we're getting sidetracked. We need to start introducing things about the book.
But to just really quick, judge a book by its cover. The one you have has a monk holding a rose. And in the back is an abbey.
Yes, in the style of what an abbey would be depicted like in the 14th century art style.
Yeah, that didn't really give me anything more than what you had already told me. It's about monks.
I know.
I wouldn't have gotten that it was a murder mystery. I honestly would have thought it was a love story.
Now, they put a rose on the cover, and I know a lot of book covers do that. Were you disappointed roses weren't really ever brought up?
No, because you'd ruined it.
I already ruined. Okay. I was about to say, if you're going to read this book, folks, expecting at one point roses to be important, it's never brought up at all.
Well, since we're starting with the cover, we might as well spill it, because you told me this as soon as you started looking for the book, because you had researched it.
Yes.
The reason it's called The Name of the Rose is because the author didn't have a title that he liked.
Yeah, let me pull up the actual, I think I got it here. Let me find it. Title, there it is. Yeah, it says, much attention has been paid to the mystery of what the book's title refers to. I'm just reading from Wikipedia. In fact, Eco has stated that his intention was to find a totally neutral title. In one version of the story, when he had finished writing the novel, Eco hurriedly suggested some 10 names for it and asked a few of his friends to choose one. They chose The Name of the Rose. In another version of the story, Eco wanted the neutral title Adso of Milk, named after the young monk who's the narrator, but that was vetoed by his publisher. And then the title The Name of the Rose came to me virtually by chance. In the postscript to The Name of the Rose, Eco claims to have chosen the title because the rose is a symbolic figure so rich in meaning that by now it hardly has any meaning left. So yeah, there's different versions, which is appropriate for the book, that his friends suggested it, that his publishers suggested it, that he meant it to be like that, but it's all over the place. But pretty much it was random. It really has no bearing on the book. The main thing is that because the symbol of a rose has been used and overused so much that it's lost all real true meaning, it's become a cliche, it's become a empty symbol because of how overused it is, that it felt appropriate that a book talking about symbols and the inability for words and symbols to convey true meaning, it just felt appropriate to name it The Name of the Rose. But no roses are in the book. They might mention it once, but
I don't think they do.
There's no roses in the whole thing. There's no like big plot point. It's not brought up in conversation. It's just called The Name of the Rose.
Yeah. I thought there would be more villagers for some reason, because in the cover you can see kind of a village, but not really. That was the only thing I thought, that I was like, oh, maybe this, and I was wrong. So, but this book is so long.
It is.
But the story isn't, because the part that children might find boring, he goes on gratuitous Catholic history, Italian history.
Yes.
Yeah, just history rants.
You did the same thing I did. I was reading and I'd hit a point where he says, of course, the Dulcinites and this person. You're like, what? And you go to Google and start Googling, who is this person? And you learn something about Italian history or Catholic history that you never knew about, which poor 1980s audiences, if you didn't know it, you didn't know it. You'd have to go to the library and look at the encyclopedias or something to try to get an idea of what he's talking about. Thank goodness for our modern era where we could just Google it real quick.
Honestly, I think he does a pretty good job of explaining everything.
Yeah, that's true.
The only thing I looked up, and it's because he waited a while to tell you what it is I looked up the saying that Salvador said.
Yeah, the pinna.
Yeah, that word.
Down here. Dulcinians. I've been saying Dulcinites, but it's Dulcinians. My bad. So it's not listed on my little summary thing here. I have a summary up. There's a lot of names, Italian names in this book. It's a little hard to keep track sometimes.
Don't worry. I wrote down them all.
Well, I got a little summary up too, just to help myself if I get tripped up, I guess. Anyways.
But he says that William makes a big deal about it, and then they kind of move on. And so I looked it up and I'm like, I don't get it. And then a couple chapters later, he finally explains it. So that's the only thing I looked up, and only because I was a little impatient.
You make a good point, though. You really don't entirely need to know what he's talking about because he gives you enough context for the story to be able to move on.
Yeah. And so it is a murder mystery, weirdly enough.
Technically, it's a postmodern one, so it's not what you think it is. Because most, you start with a murder, not to say Agatha Christie and Arthur Conan Doyle and stuff wouldn't do something like this, but I mean, most of the murders happen because of stupidity or people bumbling into their deaths.
Or accidents.
Exactly. I mean, the main person who causes them all did do something nefarious, but it's not like he was vindictively finding these people to kill them. They kept just screwing up and falling into his little trap he left.
Of the 6 people that died before the ending.
Yes.
Only 2 of them were purposeful murders.
Yes, that was the apocrypher, the gardener guy.
The herbalist.
Herbalist, that's a better word. Herbalist. The herbalist guy, he's bashed over the head. And who's the second one?
Venatius.
Yeah, the first death is the guy who commits suicide. At first, it seems like he didn't commit suicide. Maybe he was murdered, but then...
Pretty quick. William's like, nah.
Figures out pretty quickly, no, he killed himself. But why did he kill himself? And then the next death is the translator, and he dies. They find him upside down inside a pot of blood.
Oh, no, that's not a murder on purpose. So he just distorted the evidence. That's different. So there was only technically one actual murder.
Yeah, technically.
There was a trap that kept getting sprung.
Exactly.
But it was more for anyone that touched the book and not specifically. So we start the book with William of Baskerville, which is very purposely named.
Yes, Echo has stated he intentionally named it after Baskerville is a made-up place, and it is based off Sherlock Holmes, the Hound of Baskerville. And he is trying to say William is a type of Sherlock Holmes with that, because he's a character from England.
Yes, he is. I kind of love... So Adso is writing this in his old age about this adventure he had when he was younger. But he starts the book off and he says... There are so many people, and I'm not really going to go into detail about what they looked like. And then gives the most graphic descriptions of people's faces for the first couple of chapters. Later on, he actually follows through with that, and he's just like, oh, that guy with the face. He doesn't really give any description, but for William, for Umbertino, for Salvador, for the abbot, he just has the most vivid descriptions of what they look like.
That's just a good postmodern example of how humans are contradictions.
I'm not going to focus on it. Anyway, here's William, who is in his 50s, tall, thin, sharp eyes, thin, beaky nose, long face, firm chin, freckles, hair and ears, thick and blonde eyebrows. That's more than some modern day books give you.
Definitely looks like Sean Connery, all that you just described.
Yeah, that was a pretty good casting.
So yeah, we got William of Baskerville, which is a definite, not illusion.
He's a man of contemplation and science.
No, it's illusion. Illusion is when you reference something without directly referencing it, right?
Yeah, an illusion.
Yeah, so he's an illusion of Sherlock Holmes. And then you got Adso of Melk. and he's from Germany.
Who's the son of a noble, so he's a rich boy.
Yeah, and he is protege to William. William is teaching him the ropes and traveling with him because both of them are members of the Franciscan order, which is a relatively new order in the 14th century. And they believe in poverty and focusing on humility and things like that, which is not exactly the focus of the Benedict monks. I think I'm saying that right. Benedictine? I can never say it right. But they wear black robes, and they're more focused on being copyists, copying and writing and creating books and disseminating knowledge, usually scriptorial knowledge, but also knowledge from like Aristotle, Plato, the classics, things like that.
Yeah. He's obsessed with Roger Bacon. He mentions it a lot.
Yes, so that is a big deal because it shows how William's different. And different in the case of England has always been sort of its own island because it's literally an island. And its philosophers are different for many, many centuries. Francis Bacon was pretty radical, and it showed that he was from England, the way his philosophy, right? So William is sort of different from his other Franciscan monk brethren, from a lot of other people who think, not to say all English are like that, but I think the author's kind of nodding to that how unique and different with his philosophy William is for being obsessed with Francis Bacon.
Yes. And you mentioned before, and I'll bring it up so I make sure you say it again, haha. He is kind of human embodiment of humanism.
Yeah, he is a bit advocate. But the irony is Eco, who's definitely putting postmodern theory into this book, he is an example of humanism, but postmodernists love to show how humanists are secretly post-humanist because their humanism is eventually going to contradict or discredit itself, aka deconstruct. Basically, there's going to be something that William is a humanist until something underhand says humanism, which I think you noticed a lot in the book that frustrated you sometimes.
Yeah.
Especially when it came to the woman.
Well, a lot of things, but we'll definitely get to that. But can you explain a little bit more what humanism is for our people at home?
Oh, yes. I'll give my James Reiner really bad interpretation of humanism for anyone who actually is good at philosophy and theory who listens to this and said, nice try, buddy. Anyways, humanism, in contrast to the theology of the time where Catholicism would teach during the Middle Ages that, life sucks, you're a sinner, you're trash, you're kind of just this sinful, nasty thing.
You're born into sin.
You're born into sin, right? The world sucks, and I can't blame them. The world does kind of suck, but life sucks, and that's where God placed you, right? If you're a peasant toiling in the dirt, that is your lot in life, right? You are a sinful person, and you are meant to toil. If you're a king dealing with political intrigues and problems, that's your lot in life. All you can hope for, all anyone can hope for, up and down the caste system, is that heavenly reward, that hopefully Christ will save you and you will earn that reward where life doesn't suck in heaven, right? So humanism comes along, and we're on the cusp of it. We're in the pre-humanism where philosophers like Francis Bacon and others are on the cusp of creating a new idea of looking at life. And humanism is, well, you know what? Humans aren't that bad. Humans are actually pretty awesome. They're intelligent. They can achieve great things. So really, we shouldn't sit here and say humans are scumful, terrible things. We should try to praise how beautiful humans are. And you know what? Instead of waiting for that heavenly reward, we should strive to do things in the here and now to make life wonderful. We should help the poor and make better systems of government and make beautiful art that, instead of just praising saints and stuff, that exemplifies good human characters, right? How wonderful and beautiful humanity can be. And that's how you get artists like Leonardo and Michelangelo and Raphael and Donatello, the Ninja Turtles. Stuff like Michelangelo's David was to show how beautiful the human figure can be and how awe-inspiring it can be. And that was just the cusp of all this happening. So yeah, that's kind of William Baskerville's viewpoint. He's not bogged down by theology. He hates the inquisitors. He's less about tearing people down and attacking people.
Understand them.
He wants to understand. Yeah, he's all about logic. He thinks that instead of everything being wicked and evil and witches and devils, he's like, I want to cling to knowledge and understanding and virtue and stuff like that in the here and now.
Yeah, and he goes out of his way. You obviously get the histories and stuff, and these people are considered hypocrites, and these people are heretics, and this, that, and the other thing. And he kind of goes out of his way to point out to Odso, well, they might have thought they were doing the right thing. And how easy would it be for us to possibly fall into that same trap, which I think is a very interesting conversation in general. But he really does have that. They're just not like the Inquisitor and some other people seem to think. They're not just inherently evil. They actually think they're doing the right thing. People aren't just out here just being terrible for terrible's sake, you know?
Yeah, he's definitely the enlightened one in the midst of not so enlightened people.
But as the posthumanist pointed out, I've got beef with you, William.
There's some contradictions. You may be the shining light amongst some pretty not so great people, but you aren't so great yourself when you really stare at you.
Yeah.
So yeah, that, and I think before we move on to posthuman, I feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't mention how Adso is William's Watson. He's a young guy. He's a little clueless. He's there to kind of be the audience for us, to William to bounce ideas off.
Counter argument. Having read both Sherlock and Hercule Poirot.
You're going to say the Hercules little guy, right? What's his name?
He's a Hastings! He's the worst! He makes things worse!
I agree. It's just that more people know Watson over Hastings.
Watson's was so useful.
I know. Okay, so you make a good argument. I'm just using Watson in the sense of the +1 of a more intelligent investigator.
Yeah, the one to be the sounding board.
But go ahead, explain. Why do you think he's more of a Hastings than a Watson?
So Sherlock keeps Watson around not just because he's his little buddy, but because he provides a service to Sherlock that he could not get otherwise. He's a medical doctor. He can speak about medical things. And Sherlock has a lot of knowledge, but he keeps that person around for how useful they are. Hastings and Poirot get together because they're buddies. And the joke is that Poirot just keeps him around as a literal sounding board and kind of pokes at him. The last book I read, Hastings goes, "I've been thinking," and Poirot immediately responds, "That's a good practice. You should keep it up."
So you're basically saying where Watson is somewhat competent, Sherlock keeps him because he has actual intelligence and knowledge that is useful. Hastings is just the good old boy, the buddy. He doesn't really bring much to Poirot. Poirot just keeps him around for laughs.
In a way, he functions, and sometimes he helps. But for the most part, he just functions as the narrator. And he'll go off and have his own things and his own thoughts, and he will mess things up, kind of like Adso messes things up at one point. And so it just feels much more Hastings to me than Watson.
Now, Watson does have his Hastings moments, but yeah, I agree with that assessment. So Adso, he's young, he's very clueless. I don't think there's ever really too much of a time where William's like, "Good job, Adso, you're so smart." It's more like, "Oh, Adso, you silly, silly young man, you just don't get it."
Whenever he helps, it's usually by accident.
Accident, yeah. So that is kind of their dynamic.
And I think it's because he's deconstructing what the helper is like, because he's deconstructing everything.
Yes.
And so you kind of end up with a Hastings character, but that's my argument.
Yeah. So yeah, you got this dynamic of a bright-eyed, little bit clueless young monk tagging along.
Who thinks very highly of himself, but not at the same time.
I mean, that's youth right there. You just explained it. Thinking highly of yourself, but not really. But then you got William, who is a humanist. He loves logic. He's very smart. People know this. He used to be an inquisitor, but he's now a Franciscan monk.
Because he became a monk instead of an inquisitor because he didn't like that the Inquisitions just felt like, oh, pick the first scapegoat and then torture them into saying it instead of actually finding the truth.
Yeah, we eventually learned that in the book. So yeah, the both of them are coming to this random monastery in Italy that's famous for its books. It has a huge library collection, but they're coming to this place because being a member of the order of the Franciscan order, it's during the time in the 14th century where the Franciscan monks are at odds with the current Pope, which luckily enough, I do have the Pope here. It is Pope John the 22nd. So Pope John the 22nd is at odds with them because the Franciscan monks are saying the apostles didn't own wealth, that Christ told them not to hold money or hold wealth.
Or have property or things and such.
Or have property, that they should live in poverty and only serve people. And that goes counter to the current state of the Catholic Church, where Pope John the 22nd and many of the other cardinals and organizations of the church have lots of wealth and lots of money and lots of power.
And lots of land and servants.
And this whole system is at risk now because the Franciscan order is is basically saying we need to live in poverty. So they're at odds. Pope John the 22nd wants to get rid of this Franciscan monks who are causing trouble.
But he can't because they have the backing of the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire.
So it's a big political situation. So William is meeting at this monastery with other Franciscan monks to meet emissaries from the Pope to discuss before going to Rome to try to resolve these issues, which they don't. This is kind of the B plot of the book. They meet together and they do not agree.
It is so B plot that it takes him half the book to actually be like, oh yeah!
To actually get there. Oh yeah, the real reason William came here. So yeah, they get together. It doesn't go well. The Pope's emissaries, the people the Pope sends, they use the murders going on as an excuse.
To be like, see, these Franciscans are devil worshippers. They're terrible.
They're radicals. They're devil worshippers. They're going to bring ruin to the God's church, yada, yada.
They're murdering the good folk.
Exactly. And then later on, if you look it up, the head of the Franciscan order that William meets there, Michael, he goes to Rome and ends up getting killed as a heretic.
Which he tells you in the book, there are historical people and then there are made up people, obviously. And you have a pretty good chance of figuring out who's a real person based on how many paragraphs they get for their backstory.
Fair, yes.
Michael gets a lot of introduction and then he gets a lot of, and this is what happened to him.
So this is a real, well, the meeting that happens at this monastery didn't happen, but this is a real situation that was going on in 14th century Catholic Church, was this debate about poverty and should clergy of God own property and wealth. It was a lot, it was pretty bloody too.
Yeah, and this meeting didn't happen at this abbey because this abbey doesn't exist.
Yes.
And I kind of love how he does it because Adso starts the book and is like, I feel it's prudent that I write this down and I chronicle this. And even now, though, it feels right and holy to withhold the name of this abbey.
Ooh, mystery.
Okay, yeah, this is fake. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so that's the reason William and Adso are going to this monastery, but as soon as they get there, after a fun little thing where William shows his skills with locating a horse, showing off his detective skills, which I know you get a little peeved off because that's the only thing he really does in the book.
I don't get peeved off by that, actually. I think that's actually a little funny. I also like how it starts the book because he's able to be like, oh, your horse went that way, and he's never seen the horse before in his life. Brunhillius, he even knows the name of the horse.
They're shocked that he knows the name. They're shocked he knows it was the abbot's horse. They're shocked he knows it's lost.
That it's missing at all.
Yeah, and they shocked that he knew exactly where it went. And later in that chapter, Adso's like, how'd you know all that? And William breaks down, and very classic Sherlock Holmes,
Hercule
Poirot, yeah. Any preceding detective showing off how, oh, I just analyzed this and noticed that and made a good guess on this. And I mean, it was definitely making the immediate connection that William is a Sherlock type character.
Yeah, even modern day detectives still do that. And I mean, they do it a little bit as a nod, but like Blanc from the Knives Out franchise also does that.
And really, and this shows how cool Edgar Allan Poe is. Poe is one of the first to do that. The Murders in the Rue Morgue, I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but it's considered one of the first detective short stories, where the beginning of the short story shows two men walking down the street, the guy who's the detective in the story looking at his friend and basically answering a question he was thinking about, and his friend being shocked and be like, how'd you know that? And the guy breaking down, well, I looked at your facial expressions, I thought about what we were talking about before, I realized what your train of thought was based on what you were looking at as we were walking, and I realized this is exactly what you're thinking at this moment, and that's how I was able to answer what you were thinking about. And it was just the classic, it set the standard. Sherlock does it, Poirot, all the way up to, like you said, Blanc and the Knives Out. This is what detectives do. And William's doing it too. But really, the irony of this moment, as we learn later in the story, is that William's so good at guessing all these answers, and yet at the end of the story, when he finally figures out who the murderer is, basically,
and why and how and all that.
Why and how? He's wrong. He's right, but he's wrong. He guessed the right person,
but for the wrong reason.
Came to it at the wrong conclusions. He realized it was the blind monk who was killing everyone with a poisoned book, but he thought the monk was doing it based off revelations, and what he comes to find out is it was all accident. It was all accident. People just kept bumbling into touching this poisoned book, and it was not planned at all. And William's like, oh, that's so frustrating. I was right, but I was wrong at the same time.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, for those following at home, Murders in the Rue Morgue.
Thank you, Rue Morgue.
But we say accident. George purposely poisoned poisoned this book.
You're gay. Keep calling him George. We learned in the movie, and it's pronounced with a "y," not a "j."
I was reading the book, and it's spelled Jorge. And when they started the movie, and they got to, it was like, venerable, you're gay. And I was like, oh no.
Oh no.
And my husband was like, what's wrong? And I was like, I've been calling him George.
So yeah, the murder, spoiler alert, not really, because you're listening to this, folks.
We warned you. So he poisoned the book purposely, that whoever turned the pages, most likely by licking their finger, will die after reading this book.
Because he took what many speculate is like a cyanide type poison from a mysterious plant that the herbalist finds, but is stolen from him at one point. Blind Jorge takes this poison and he puts it on the edges of the pages of the book. So when you touch it with your fingers and lick your mouth or touch your mouth, you're going to kill yourself.
And only because there's no way I'm going to remember this when we start talking about the movie in earnest. The way the director directed the actors to lick their finger was weird.
Yeah, sometimes it was a little over the top, and I know you pointed out a few times it was a little too sexual.
It was overtly sexual the way they were doing it. It was weird.
I think the best one was when in the movie they were eating, and whenever monks eat, they have someone reading from the scriptures, and the guy reading is, and then he stops and a big lick.
He licks his entire finger. No one does that.
His whole finger just licks the whole thing, just this huge gesture, and then flips the page, and you just burst out laughing.
Look at literally anyone who does that. They don't actually lick their finger. They just like tap their finger to their tongue to get a tiny bit of moisture and to turn the page.
Yeah, like moisten it. That guy was like that from the base of the finger to the tip. I'm going to run my tongue right up.
It's so weird.
And I was like, babe, it's foreshadowing. And she's like, yeah, it's a little too much.
You can foreshadow without, oh my gosh. Anyway, it needs to be known that that was weird. The point is, they get into the abbey. The abbot says, hey, we have a mystery. And of course, William's like, immediately, this will become my life obsession.
Yeah, William's like, I'm on it. I love this crap.
So the abbot explains that recently a young monk died, and they think it was murder.
But it wasn't.
But it wasn't. You come to find out really fast. But he says, hey, we found him at the base of the tower. There's a tower structure that's like 5 stories tall. We found him at the base of the tower, but no windows were open. There was a blizzard. They would have noticed, hey, if a window was open, there would be all the snow. So it's not even if someone closed it later. No, they would know. Immediately, William looks at it and says, oh yeah, no, he jumped over there. He just happened to fall over here. There was just like a rock slide.
Yeah, so he did jump, but William's like his body due to the, I think it was rain before snow. I can't remember. But basically the weather pushed his body to the side. It had a rock slide and it fell off the cliff.
And so it looked like he came from the tower, but he didn't.
He jumped from a different tower that didn't have windows. He just jumped from the top. So yeah, he committed suicide. So William's like, okay, he wasn't murdered. It was suicide. Why did he commit suicide? So that's kind of the new mystery until another body shows up and kind of blows it wide open that, okay, this is more crazy than I thought it was.
But this does begin William's habit of solving tiny mysteries and telling no one, beside Adso, but no one. They walk in, he sees a fresh pot, they're like, oh yeah, we buried him, I gave him an actual burial, and William's like, oh, so that means that he didn't commit suicide, because you're disgraced if you commit suicide, it's a whole thing.
Yeah, you're not buried in hollowed ground if you commit suicide.
And so that's how William's like, hey, you think this is murder. So he figures out almost immediately that it's suicide, and then he doesn't tell anyone that.
In the book, yeah.
At that point, I gave it to him. Why bring this up if you don't have to? There is other murders going on. Maybe something weird happened. This guy was buried in sacred ground. Let it just rest in whatever. But as the book goes on, it gets frustrating. And I pointed this out to you with the movie because the movie doesn't do that. Movie William tells the abbot everything.
Yeah.
Book William tells him nothing. And then the abbot keeps saying, hey, you haven't discovered anything. You're kind of terrible at this. And William just thumbs up.
And as I pointed out, Book William can keep it to himself because we're inside William's head. The narrator is letting us know what's being figured out because William's telling Adso, and Adso's the narrator. But movie William, I felt like the director is like, I gotta have William explaining what's going on or the audience is gonna be lost.
Yeah, but he could have explained it to Adso. He didn't have to explain it specifically to the abbot.
Yeah, but I think it had to be streamlined, if I'm being honest.
But that's one of the things in the movie that I actually kind of dislike, because I feel like the movie tries really hard to be a movie, be entertaining, make sense.
Yeah.
Have their characters do heroic things. And I think it takes away a lot of the post-human of it, because the whole reason William doesn't tell anyone is kind of deconstructing the detective. Are they solving the mystery because they are trying to do good in the world, or are they solving the mystery because this has become their special interest and they don't actually care about the good? And so you see in William how things could have been so much better if he had told someone any of this along the way. But to him, he's like, oh, that's not part of the mystery anymore. It doesn't matter. And he just keeps pushing forward in his own way.
Yeah, it contradicts the whole human as we talked about. He seems more dedicated to figuring out the mystery than he is about stopping murders or anything in the abbot.
And I think that's foreshadowed in why he left the Inquisition. He didn't care that people were burning. He just cared that they weren't going for the truth and then burning people. So he's very much in it for knowledge.
Yeah, he's a complicated one. But yeah, they figure out the first guy who died from suicide. They don't know why, but he killed himself.
And during his investigation, by the way, he gets in a confrontation with Jorge several times.
Yes, so they find out that the monk who killed himself, he was a very good illuminist, where on pages of scriptures... Illustrator, illuminist, whatever, it's all kind of the same thing. Well, what he does is he draws on, in the Middle Ages, with some pages of scriptures, they would have lots of illustration, art depicted in the margins, letters really fancifully designed with pictures around it. And William is analyzing what the monk would work on, and it has lots of funny scenes in it, like the Pope as a fox and the abbot as a monkey and a donkey teaching cardinals from the scriptures.
I think that's only in the movie. But anyway, that's not the point.
There's stuff like weird-looking creatures, like a person's head as a butt or something like that.
Oh yeah, he invents his own creatures.
Yes. The point is he makes funny creatures, and William finds it very funny and hilarious, and I can't remember if it happens in the book, right? But all the monks basically laugh, and Jorge gets really upset and says monks shouldn't laugh, right? Laughter is an abomination in front of God, basically. And William and Jorge have a debate, a scriptorial debate, saying, is laughter from God? Did Christ laugh? Is it right for people to laugh? And Jorge's really against it. He's like, no, it deforms the face.
Makes you look like a monkey.
Yeah, it mocks God. People should have fear because fear leads to faith.
And if you're laughing, you don't have fear.
Yeah, and William really pushes like, no, humor is the spice of life and it's really important.
It's very unique to humans, so there must be a reason we do it.
Yeah, and it's like the scriptures never say Christ didn't laugh. So he's really pushing for that. So they have this big debate that all the monks watch.
Over several days.
Which comes into play later. But yeah, that happens in the investigation. And then the next day they find another monk upside down in a vat of blood.
And he's important because apparently they had this same conversation before William came. And this guy, Venantius,
he's a translator,
also made an argument for laughter. And Jordan was like, you don't know what you're talking about. And so it seems like he's the anti-William in a lot of ways. What's an anti-humanist? Is that a thing?
Not really.
But he represents the old ways. This gosh darn new generation ruining the world. So Venantius was friends with the guy who committed suicide.
Yes, his name was Adelmo, is the one who committed suicide. So Adelmo and Venantius were friends.
And they were both present during this conversation with Jorge.
Yeah, but the important thing is that what William finds out when they pull Venantius's body out of the pig's blood vat is that his tongue and his fingers are stained black.
Yes.
And William finds that interesting.
And to go along with this, it's about now that they learn, oh yeah, and the assistant librarian kind of laughed at, someone mentioned, oh, you can go all the way to Africa to learn something or something. And the assistant librarian laughed at it and is kind of like, oh, if only you knew what you could learn in Africa or something along those lines. And everyone thinks that's really weird, but they don't say anything. And William's like, sounds like he shared something he wasn't supposed to, because he got in trouble immediately for saying that. So he's not sure what it means, but he's like, I think it has to do with the library. And thus begins his obsession with the library.
Yes, the library's off limits to them. The librarian and the assistant librarian refuse to let anyone that's not them into the library. William really wants to go into it, but they say, nope, you can look at this book that lists all the books in the library, and we will get you the book if it's allowed, but you cannot go inside yourself. It is not allowed. And William's like, well, that's just...
And he tries to convince the abbot, because supposedly it's the abbot's orders, but you might learn something different later. And the abbot kind of uses the Brunilius episode against him. He's like, if you can find a missing horse without ever seeing him, then you can figure out a murder without seeing where the murder took place. I was like, oh.
Yeah, so the abbot denies him to let him go into the library. So William has to figure out a secret way into the library, which he's convinced that there's some way to go into the library without the main door from the area all the monks work.
Because the tower gets locked from the inside by the librarian. And obviously the librarian, not obviously, I thought he literally slept in the library, but he does not. And so there has to be a way for him to exit while still keeping the tower locked.
Exactly. So eventually they do figure out how to get into it, but the library is booby-trapped. It's got all these creepy little things inside of it first off, it's a bit of a maze. You can get really lost in it if you don't know how to navigate it.
Because there's windows and false windows and doors and pathways, and this one goes here, but this one doesn't go here, and there's scrolls on the wall, but some of them say the same thing as other rooms. It's a whole thing.
It's a whole thing. And then it's got intentional drafts that they made where it makes you feel like someone's touching the back of your neck to freak you out.
It has candles that make you hallucinate.
Hallucinate if you get too close to the scent that comes off of it.
Which Adso does.
Yeah, he has a trip, basically. Poor William has to rescue him. And a mirror that would freak people out if you turned upon it in the dark with just a candle.
It's a trick mirror, like a funhouse mirror. He sees himself, but sees like a huge monster instead of seeing himself. And so William has to explain to him what trick mirrors are.
But they come to the realization there's a secret room that they want to locate that kind of ties into what the assistant librarian said, called the Finis Africae.
Which is the end of Africa.
End of Africa, which means the end of the world, aka the last of knowledge, the most important bit. And they know we need to access this room because it's a key to what's going on with these people dying.
Kind of plays a little bit into the... Okay, so for a time period, there's this other blind dude who's bitter about not being the librarian, but won't say who stole it from him, which I think is really weird. Just be like, it was Jorge, that guy over there. He stole it from me. But he doesn't, to make it more mysterious, I guess. But he's obsessed with the idea that this is the different trumpets of the apocalypse. So the first trumpet was Eldelmo's death. The second one was Venantius. And so the third one, it's going to be by water.
Yeah, he proclaims it's going to be by water. And wouldn't you know it, the next person to die is...
found in a bath.
Yep, the assistant librarian that William suspects, because him and Adso go at night to the desk of Adelmo, the one who committed suicide. They're pretty sure the book he was looking at that's important to all this was at his desk still. They go to look for it, and the assistant librarian has stolen it, and then he distracts them.
He also steals William's glasses.
Yeah, which William's like, crap, my glasses, those are unique and really hard to find because they don't really exist in the Middle Ages.
Yeah, he has to teach the blacksmith how to make it. It's a whole thing.
How to make a new pair. It's a whole thing. But yeah, the assistant librarian steals the book back. So yeah, the assistant librarian goes to take a bath and they find him, I think it's like a day or so later.
Yeah, the assistant librarian told Adelmo. Adelmo was really upset, so instead gave Venantius the note, and then Adelmo went and committed suicide. Venantius is the one who actually went and got it, and it was at his desk.
Yes, my bad. I'm mixing that up a little bit.
Oh, there's so much stuff.
There is a lot of intricacy, and when you're reading it, it's okay, but it's really hard to figure out the mystery. You can understand why William didn't exactly get it all together, and even made mistakes himself as he was getting getting it together.
And there's so many little pieces where you're like, is this important? Is this not important? But if you don't add it and then it's important later, you're like, okay, wait a second, I got to go back and explain all this.
But yeah, the assistant librarian, Berengar, is found in a tub. It looks like he drowned, and everyone freaks out because of the old begrudging blind man who's like, aha, it is revelation.
The third one was about water.
But William looks at the body and he notices once again that the fingertips and the tongue are black. And he's like, aha.
Which is just weird.
Which is weird.
And so he keeps going back to the herbalist and they become friends.
Which is sad because the herbalist does die.
And he's like, you have all these herbal things, but obviously herbs in certain quantities could be deadly. And the herbalist agrees. And he's actually like, oh, I actually was gifted this really, really, really rare poison. And I had it on my shelf. But then William has to get it out of him later. Someone stole it. And so we're just going to put a pin in that. There's a mysterious poison that has been disappearing. And now people are dying after reading a book.
Yes. So things are going along. And then it really kicks into gear when the Pope's delegate comes. And part of them is Bernard Gui, G-U-I, Guy, Bernard Guy. I don't know how to say that.
Gui. I think it was Gui.
I don't think Gui's right.
I think that's how they said it in the movie.
Well, anyways, Bernard, we'll just call him Bernard, right? Bernard's an inquisitor, and he's the anti-William, I guess you could say. He's all about torturing people and using manipulation to make people look guilty and stuff like that.
He's still an inquisitor, and he loves his job.
He loves his job. So basically, he finds his guinea pigs of two guys, Salvador and the Cellular. The guy who runs the food and stuff for the Abbey.
Cellar.
Yeah, I'm just going to call him the Cellar.
Wait, because it's Cellar-er.
Yeah, I know.
Because it's Cellar-er. Anyway.
Yeah, anyways, he runs the cellars, the food storage for the Abbey, and comes to find out that there's this peasant girl that sneaks in and he gives her food for sexual favors, and Salvador's in on it too because he kind of works for the guy who runs the cells, this kind of hunchback guy who talks in nonsense. I remember you got really upset because every time you read what Salvador says, it's very headache-inducing.
It gave me a headache.
So Salvador is a really, really ignorant, low-class peasant who only learned words
how to speak
through different people's languages. So every time he speaks, it's a mixture of a whole bunch of languages.
And William points out, it's not that he knows those languages. He's literally just repeating what other people said, and he may or may not actually know what it means.
Exactly. He's repeating phrases and idioms, and he just spits them out left and right.
It just reminded me of the Kinku.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. Which postmodernists would just have a field day with. This is beautiful because he's spitting out these phrases and words that have meaning, but to him they really don't. And he kind of uses them in ways that he intends in different ways. It just shows the fallibility of language, how slippery and incomplete it is. And he's just the embodiment of that.
And even though we know language, do we really know language?
Exactly. I mean, to Salvador, he makes perfect sense. To us, we want to hit our face against a brick.
Thankfully, though, Adso usually summarizes what he says.
Yes, but it is headache-inducing. But, yeah, and you come to find out eventually that these guys were members of the Dulcinians, a heretic group that split off from the Catholic Church in Italy, promoting that the rich should be basically taken down, that the rich need to be killed and their wealth distributed to the poor. And it didn't go over so well. Basically, the leader of this group was hunted down and burned at the stake for creating this whole movement. And these two are remnants of that. They joined this abbey after leaving this order.
Because they say they want to do that, but then they murder innocent people too.
Yeah, they're not good people, which shows because the guy who runs the cells and Salvador both want to get with this woman. And that kind of is what gets them in hot water. Is basically they find Salvador trying to enact a love spell in order to woo the woman into being in love with him.
It pisses me off a little bit because he tells Adso that that's what he's doing. And Adso's not like, maybe wait a week.
When the Inquisitors, who are constantly looking for devil worshippers and witches, aren't here. But oh well, they get caught, and the Bernard guy finds his scapegoat to make himself look so good because he found the murderers, and he's going to torture and convince them.
But also to point out, to twist the Francians' beliefs, and it's like, hey, you see these other guys that said we should be poor and then murdered a bunch of innocent people? You guys are the same thing.
Exactly. So it really causes the debate they have with the Pope's envoy to just fall apart because they're like, you Franciscans are just as bad. There's no discussing with you because you are killing people like these Dulcinians.
You're housing these heretics. And once again, you know what would have solved this?
William not keeping his mouth shut.
William telling the abbot when he found out that's what the cellarer was doing.
Now, granted, and the movie points this out too, that if William tries to go against what the Inquisitors are saying, they would say he's a heretic too.
Yes, but if before all this, because this would be before they found him doing a spell, if he just immediately went to the abbot and was like, hey, your guy's doing this, it's not great, you should probably get him to stop/punish him, then we wouldn't have this. And it ruins his debate, even though, quote unquote, this debate is so freaking important, he can't go find the book that's been found, but that's beside the point.
Yeah.
He just sabotages himself.
A little bit, yeah. But yeah, so while they're having the debate, the herbalist comes and signals to William that he found the book, that the assistant librarian had taken it with him to the baths and had hid it in the herbalist's office, is what we learned. So he's like, I found the book, William. And William's like, go and lock the door and don't let anyone come in, and I'll be there as soon as I'm done with the debate.
It pissed me off because Michael comes out and he's like, no, William, we need you right now. And so we get to see the next scene, and William doesn't say anything. He doesn't do anything. Oh my gosh. This is, Anyway, that was convenient for the murderer. This is the only actual murder, too. I mean, obviously the other was murder, but, like, purposeful. It was purposeful. I don't know how to separate them. Anyway, this one is actually by someone's hand, premeditated, in that he went there knowing he was going to kill a very specific person.
Yeah. What would that be? First degree murder? Where the other ones are second degree? Is that what Jorge is doing when he intentionally poisons something to let people die from it?
Yeah, it would still be first degree because the difference between first and second is intent.
Okay, so who kills with the ball was the librarian, right?
The librarian.
Yeah, the librarian, even though Remigio gets blamed, the seller, the guy who works to say he's found there, and that's when Bernard's like, aha, you are the one who's leading this, and he gets roped in.
And he's like, no, I literally just walked in here, I swear.
But the librarian, Malachi's the one that actually killed the herbalist.
With something that made it look like the fourth trumpet.
Yeah, exactly.
But by accident.
But by accident again. No one's trying to follow the actual Book of Revelations plot point, which is what William gets disgusted at the end. It's like, that was so misleading.
We're just humans trying to find patterns and things that don't have patterns.
So when William gets done with the debate, he goes to the herbalist and they find him dead. And the guy who runs the cells gets roped in with Salvador and the poor young peasant woman, and all three get accused and called guilty for their crimes and dragged off to Rome to basically be burned at the stake. And Bernard's a real person, really a historical person who worked with Pope John the 22nd to persecute the Franciscans and anyone else they consider heretic. He takes off to Rome too, all happy that they won the debate and he found the heretics and found the murderers. And in the book, it looks like he's all victorious.
I still gonna be bitter about this. The first time we meet the peasant woman, she's in the kitchen, and Adso just happens to be in the kitchen, and
I know what you're getting. You have a right to be. It's really ridiculous.
It's a porn setup.
You are still mad that she just throws himself at him.
Literally, this poor, nerdy guy who just so happens to be in the kitchen, and this beautiful woman walks up to him and starts sleeping with him.
This is what I think, right? I'm wondering if she thought he was the one she would have to sleep with to get the food. That it was a misunderstanding. That's all I could think.
William specifically says, oh, she did it for love because she didn't take the food with him.
Yeah, because he is an idiot. He thinks that's what happened, but the way I look at it, she slept with him because she thought, okay, I gotta sleep with this monk to get food. I guess it's this monk, and then ran off because she got scared or something and forgot the food and all the confusion. It was not love. It was just forgetfulness or fear.
It's so stupid.
Anyways, Atso is in denial because old Atso's reminiscing about that, and he spends way too many pages being like, I was such a sinner. I never should have committed this sin. but oh my gosh, it was wonderful. I can never forget it. But oh my gosh, she was so sensible and she tempted me. But oh, I will always love her. He will not make up his mind.
That's where a huge amount of the latent sexism, because everybody talking to him about women and how they're just naturally terrible and the worst things ever. And why in the world would God create such a foul creature just to tempt us?
Even William's a little tainted. But I mean, he gives probably the more enlightened answer of all, but the answer is still like, blah, women, blah.
Yeah, he's like, blah, women, but I guess they have their good side.
I don't think they're as bad as the scriptures make them, but they're so distracting.
And so pluck your eyes out. Anyway, that was my rant.
So yeah, that poor woman from the Bernard Guide gets roped into being burned at the stake. We don't get to see it. They get dragged off to Rome for it.
Which, this is actually a perfect time to bring up. This book does the thing that I now hate. Instead of having a chapter title.
Oh gosh.
Or just a number, there are sentences that summarize what happened in the chapter.
Yeah, you were very upset about that. You kept telling me how upset you were about that the more you read into the book.
They're such spoilers, but the only reason I like it now, because if I were going to reread this book for whatever reason, I literally could read the chapter title and be like, that one was boring. I didn't like that chapter. Skip.
There you go.
I know exactly what's gonna happen. I'm not missing anything. But yeah.
So after Bernard leaves with the poor people who did not commit the murders, Malachi, the librarian, drops dead in the middle of prayer, I think it is.
Yes.
And wouldn't you know it, Malachi has a black fingers and black tongue. So we're still having the deaths. And William's like, the guy was totally wrong. Wouldn't you know it?
Yeah. Which, by the way, okay, this is a weird twist. I was thinking about the chapters I would skip, and most of them are Umbertino.
Yes, you did not like that guy.
He was just so out of pocket, out of nowhere cannibalism. But Adso himself says some pretty sketchy stuff.
He does.
Because he points out, even to me, in my old eyes, those young boys look like women. And I'm just like,
yeah, I thought Abso was 100% gay.
I think he's bi.
Well, he could be, because he did talk a lot about, beautiful young men and stuff, too. I don't know if he uses those words, but he does drop a lot of hints like, men are so beautiful. And then when this young peasant girl shows up, he sleeps with her, and he's all oh my gosh, women, I cannot stop thinking about them. I was like, were you just not aware that women were a thing, I guess? Maybe you just thought you were in love with men? I don't know. I guess bi might be the answer, but there's a part of me that wonders that he had sexual urges and he just realized women was an option because he was never around them. He was always around men.
Yeah. He says that earlier in the book. And then some of the things he says about love, when he's just thinking about love over and over and over again and how terrible women are, he just said some stuff where I'm just like, head tilt. But yes, Malachi is dead. The important thing that we're actually talking about.
Which brings us into the final moments, because Malachi was really tight with Yorgay, which you learn is because Yorgay really runs the library and really runs the abbey. The abbot doesn't really run it. Malachi doesn't really run the library. It's all secretly ran by blind Yorgay.
Yeah. So they run to the library. Before this, they made a map. And they figured it out. And so they know where it is.
Yeah, they figure out the puzzle to get through the door into the secret African room.
That was in Venantius's desk. Oh, and by the way, this is an example of them not solving it. They just accidentally blunder into solutions. They're looking at this page on Venantius's desk that was ripped out of the book that they know is really important, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then Adso gets too close. He's like, here, let me use my lantern. And gets too close to the paper. And William chides him for about almost setting it on fire. Spoiler alert for foreshadowing. But because he did that, they notice, oh, hey, in invisible ink, probably lemon juice, maybe pee, there's these writings in this zodiac. And so they happen upon the solution to this because they messed up.
Yes.
And so that book has the zodiac signs, then William loses his glasses, and so there's a whole plot line of making them / finding them again. He has 2 pairs now. But reads the thing, finally translate it. He's like, oh, it means this puzzle. And I actually do think Adso, is it Adso who figures it out, or it might be William? But that is actually figured out.
I think William, but I do like you point out that Adso blunders into the solution. It's a foreshadowing, because William does the exact same thing at the end.
Yep.
He figures figures out it's Yorgay that's poisoning people, but he thinks it's because Yorgay is having some big gesture about the second coming, and he knows he's poisoning the pages.
On purpose.
Yeah, on purpose. Like, he's intentionally giving the book to people to fulfill some prophetic end of days. But Yorgay's like, no, I just poisoned the book because I don't want people reading it, and these idiots just keep doing it.
And whoever happens to read it, it kind of sucks. For example, he thought that Jorge poisoned Malachi on purpose. And he's like, no, I'm actually really sad about that. He has been so faithful to me to not read the book. And then he did. And it is what it is. Oh, also the abbot's dying?
Yes, the abbot tries to go through the secret door that Jorge uses. There's a secret door that goes straight into the Venice Africa room, and Jorge just locks him in there. And Jorge, when the William and Adso show up in the secret room, is like, yeah, the abbot's suffocating to death right now. I'm okay with that. He was a boob. I put him in place because he was obsessed with gold and power and position, and I thought he was a useful pawn to run the abbey as the face, while I actually ran the whole thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically Jorge, it's shown that the reason he runs the abbey is because he found a super, super rare book, brought it back to the abbey, and because of that, he gained his position of power. But since he was blind, he's like, I don't want to really be the face of that, so he used Malachi and the abbot to be his figureheads, the actual face, but really the abbey and Malachi turned to him to actually make decisions.
Yep.
But yeah, and the book that Jorge found, is the theoretical lost book of poetics by Aristotle about comedy. The first book of poetics by Aristotle is a real thing, which is on tragedy. And it's implied that Jorge found one, if not the only last copy of the book of comedy. And Jorge hates comedy, so he didn't want anyone to read this book, so he decided to poison the pages so that if anyone read about this book of comedy, they would die.
Yeah, which I asked you and you confirmed. It's theoretically a real book. Maybe he wrote it, maybe he didn't.
Yeah, here, let me see okay. Aristotle's Poetics is the earliest surviving work of Greek dramatic theory, extent philosophical focus on literary theory, poetic art. Aristotle divides the art of poetry into drama, verse, tragedy, lyrical poetry, and epic. The surviving book of Poetics is primarily concerned with drama, the analysis of tragedy. Although the text is universally acknowledged in the Western critical tradition, almost every detail about the seminal work has aroused divergent opinions. But yeah, I'm not really seeing here where it talks about if there is a second book. But yeah, the first book, definitely the real one that exists, is focused on tragedy. But yeah, it's implied that Jorge found the book of comedy, where Aristotle talks about how comedy is a thing.
And you know how much he hates laughter.
Yes, which William asks him about, which they do in the movie too. But William basically says, why are you doing this? Laughter exists. There's lots of people that talk and advocate for laughter. Jorge's like, yeah, but they're not Aristotle. They don't have his authority. Aristotle saying it gives it some real leverage, some real weight, some real authority to it.
Because he points out, he doesn't care what the common folk people, he doesn't care what philosophers of the time happen. He cares about the holy man. And he thinks someone like Aristotle saying comedy is good will change the church.
Yes, so he thinks this book is dangerous, though he also thinks, I discovered it, it gave me my powers, so I want to keep it, but I'm going to poison it. So if anyone tries to read it, they'll be punished for wanting to read about comedy.
And he thinks he's pulled one over on them, but then William's like, haha, I am wearing a glove.
Yeah, so he gives the book to William and says, go ahead, William, flip through the pages. He's blind. He doesn't see William has a pair of gloves on him. So William puts the gloves on, starts flipping through, and he's like, yeah, please, proceed, flip through, get Adso to read it too. And William's like, oh, you'd like that, wouldn't you? You don't know I'm wearing gloves. I'm not poisoning myself.
Yeah.
Which then, of course, causes Jorge to flip out. He knocks the lantern they have over, causing things to start burning. And he then begins to rip pages out of the book and stuff the poison pages into his mouth as he runs away into the maze. Poor William's like, don't do it! Stop him! That book's the only book that's left.
Yeah, and so he's running through this library, eating as many things as he can, while they desperately try to follow him, but it's dark. They lose their lantern until Adso's like, oh wait, I could light it again. Dang it. He is Flint. He can light it again. So he lights it again. They find Jorge, and a scuffle ensues, and fire.
Which, yeah, it's pretty intense. Abso tries to put it out with his cloak, so he takes off his clothes. He's naked. He's putting the flames out. It's not working. He runs naked into the kitchen of the abbey. It starts telling people, help save the books. And monks start rushing in. A lot of them get killed in the fire.
Because the problem is water. Obviously, they don't have indoor plumbing, but they have some water in the kitchen, reserves that they have. But in the entirety of the abbey, they just don't have enough water to put out this fire.
So yeah, it ends with, it doesn't end, but yeah, the big climax is that the whole library burns down. They're not able to save anything. Adso and William feel depressed and defeated. I think there's even a scene where William turns to Adso and basically, in so many words, hints that William's like, I'm not even sure if there's a God, because he's so depressed about it all.
Yeah, and a lot of people die in the confusion. Some people run away. It's a whole thing.
Yeah, the whole abbot falls in disarray.
Because it doesn't just burn down the library. It then burns down the entire tower, which then burns down the church, which I think is interesting because the abbot's one of those like, oh my goodness, we can only find the truth of our Lord through the beauty of jewels and such and so forth. And so he has this whole treasury under the church. And so that gets burned down. And then they burn down the farms and the herbalist, and the whole place goes up in fire.
The whole place goes up in fire, and it's gone. The abbey's wiped off the face of the earth, and all the monks who survive flee, and William and Adso are like, well, that was terrible, which I think that is the final deconstruction of William, is he was supposed to be this big logical humanist, and at the end, he's just soundly defeated.
You were supposed to save us!
He figured out the mystery, solved it, but not really. He, one, didn't actually connect all the clues correctly to the right answer. He just bumbled into the right answer. And two, getting the right answer didn't solve anything. Everyone still died. The abbey fell apart. There is no victory for him, but yet he still was victorious.
Yeah, which I think goes back to my point of what was he doing it for? Was he doing it to solve the mystery? Because he solves the mystery. But did good come from him solving the mystery? No, it did not. And you were like, oh, I'm worried about how you'll feel about the ending, which you pointed out later, it was a different ending. But I got to that point and I was just like, yeah, this was going to happen one of two ways. Either he was going to be victorious and the books get shared with everyone, which I did not see happening, or it gets burned down. It was just one or the other. There was no leaving this. And a little bit, it made me realize modern day suspense and thrillers has a lot of postmodern in it. A lot of deconstructing the detective, and like The Girl Next Door, Nancy Drew. That's a good example. Nancy Drew, she's just going around solving mysteries. And so you have the current day modern woman doing Nancy Drew stuff and it all going horribly wrong. That is very common in suspense and thriller today. So I think I was prepared, honestly. I was like, yep, all of this, everything, the detective feeling bad about solving it, the thing burning down, all these people dying. Yep, pretty on par. Pretty accurate.
I guess a little surprised you're fine with this one.
I can appreciate what the author was doing without having to like the characters. I don't need to personally like William to understand what he is / stands for.
Yeah.
In the symbolism and all that. I can get that and appreciate that and still be like, I would hate you as a person.
So that's the book. The movie, though, because the ending of the movie isn't exactly the same as the ending of the book.
No, they decide instead to have the burnings at the Abbey, except I see why they did it in the movie, but I liked it better in the...
You mean the burning of the peasant girl, Salvador, and the cellar?
Yeah, so that happens on site.
They didn't take them back to Rome. Bernard dude decides we're going to burn them at the stake right here.
Oh, and also he goes out of his way to say... They switched the series of events a little bit in the movie. In the book, the seller is charged for murder, and then there's another murder, because that kind of gets egg on the Inquisitor's face. But in the movie, he turns it around, is like, yeah, because William's the murderer. And so there's this whole, we gotta find William.
That is a big change in the movie, is that the Inquisitor Bernard is basically wanting to take William back to Rome as well, to burn him as a heretic as well, for defending the three.
And so that leads to the climactic scene of, we have to solve this mystery right now.
Because unlike the book William, who keeps quiet, the movie William speaks up and says they did not murder these people. And Bernard, the Inquisitor in the movie, says, aha, you're a heretic too. We're going to drag you back to Rome to answer for this.
And the other really big thing, the peasants' uprise. The book's more gray about who's right and who's wrong, and you get the feeling that each of them truly believes their side, ideology-wise, but the movie's too busy making the Benedicts, or whatever they are, evil. They're very evil. Anyway, so the peasants uprise at the end.
Yes, when they try to start burning the three who are accused of the murders, they burn Salvador, they burn the cellar guy, but before they can burn the woman, they see the library starting on fire. So Bernard flees with his soldiers. The peasants rescue the young peasant girl, so she doesn't die in the movie. In the book, it's heavily implied she died, but in the movie, she escapes. And then, even bigger twist, Bernard, who I want to remind the audience, we mentioned he's a real person. He continued to live on and serve the Pope. In the movie, the director's like, screw history. He has the peasants attack Bernard's carriage and gets pushed over the cliff, and the carriage flips and breaks apart, and Bernard lands on one of his torture implements and dies in the movie, which is like the director saying, screw real history, I want to do what I want.
Screw you in particular. Which was a little funny because, of course, we alluded to this earlier. You kept being like, oh, it gets all the high points where it matters. It's super faithful to the book. And then the heretic burnings were being set up and the peasants were just walking up kind of ominously. And I was like, they're about to uprise. And you're like, no, they're just there to watch. And then they started picking up stones. I'm like, they're about to do this. And then he gets murdered. And you're like, I completely forgot this.
I did, okay? It was a while ago. But yeah, it is much different. And not to mention, they don't really have that scene where William's like, I don't even know if there's a god. They just kind of leave. Actually, William saves a few books, and they seem to have this sort of sigh of relief, like, oh, we made it. And then they take off, and then Adso sees the peasant girl, and it's like this moment where Adso has to decide, am I going to stay and be with the peasant girl, or am I going to continue on with William and stay a monk, which did not happen in the book, this whole decision between love or truth or something.
And like I said, I feel like the movie takes away from it a little bit. In the book, it's just straight up like, yeah, and then William died a couple years later from the Black Plague.
Yes.
It's just like an anticlimactic ending to this supposedly wondrous detective. You know, you would expect more, and so of course he doesn't get more because that's real life. But in the movie, they keep it mysterious, and they're like, and we parted, and I never knew what became of him. It takes away the postmodern.
It does. The director definitely took a different, which makes me wonder, I mentioned to you after we watched the movie, they did do a Stars, I think it's Stars or Showtime.
Same quality, honestly.
Yeah, they're about the same thing. Apparently they, back in, I want to say 2021, I might be wrong on the year, but actually I got Wikipedia here, I could tell you, but they did a mini-series. They didn't do a movie like they did in the 80s, they did a whole mini-series. Makes me wonder if they're more faithful to the book than the movie is.
I think it's just as inaccurate, but in different ways.
Probably. The trailer makes it look like they play up the homosexual relationships a bit, which makes sense.
Because they gotta play up the sexuality in general.
Yeah, an 8-part miniseries adaptation, The Name of the Rose, was produced in Italy in 2018 and premiered on Rai. The series premiered in the UK on BBC Two. My bad, it's not. Maybe Stars picked it up from BBC Two. Or Showtime.
That's probably where it's streaming now.
Yeah, like they decided to get it from the BBC too, I guess, but that's 2018. I'm way off on the year. But apparently it was produced in Italy. They got, looks like an English actor to still play William. Oh yeah, they got Monk's brother, Ambrose.
Yeah.
Yeah, the actor who plays him, John Michael Turturro.
Adrian Monk from the Monk TV show.
Sorry, yeah, we were talking about Monk.
You can't just say Monk.
I know. Sorry, from Monk the TV show, the actor who plays his brother, Ambrose. The guy who plays in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? John Michael Turturro. He's the one that plays William in the Italian series.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
But yeah, it's 2018, 8-part miniseries. That makes me think that a lot of the actors were speaking Italian except for the English actors.
Which this movie was also filmed in Italy.
So that's kind of cool. The sets, it's an actual place in Italy, I guess. That's kind of cool. An actual monastery castle looking place. Fun.
General thoughts. This book made me realize how rusty my Latin is.
Yes, there is a bit of Latin.
There's a lot of Latin when they talk just randomly. They'll go into Latin because that's how they read the scriptures, is in Latin. They even bring it up a little bit where they're like, oh, people are trying to translate it into the common tongue and blah, 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 which is a whole thing, you know, Martin Luther and all that.
We're on the cusp of the Reformation. We're still like, I think, a century and a half away, but I mean...
It's what it's being hinted at.
Well, it shows that the Reformation was a big deal, but I mean, there were a lot of other, I want to put this in quotation mark, heretics, people who schismed from the church with their own beliefs. It's just that the Reformation really took a hold and caused a much bigger schism, where the Protestant Revolution basically took hold, where a bunch of Protestant churches rose up, where it never really happened before.
Yeah, because this book points out with all the Catholic history, a lot of orders are created, but they're still under the Pope.
Yeah, and a lot of disagreements with the popes, and lots of schisms with anti-popes and popes.
Yeah, William straight up, like, John is the worst person ever.
Yeah, pretty rough pope. And there would be moments where two popes would say they're the pope, but after a while, them battling it out, one of the pope lines would die, and then the Catholic Church would be like, well, that was clearly the true pope line. So we had a lot of those moments, but when Martin Luther came on the scene, and England with John Wycliffe and King Henry VIII eventually, and all that stuff actually took hold, and it started a whole different thing, where before it was like two popes getting political and getting different kings and stuff to side with them. This turned into the whole, we're not the Catholic Church, we're intentionally something not Catholic, we are Protestant.
Yeah, but it is definitely hinted in the book. I think Jorge even brings it up, probably. But they talk in Latin a lot, and I went into this book thinking, you know, it's been a while since I've studied Latin, but I think I feel pretty good about... No, I don't feel good about any of it. I wouldn't recommend translating either. It's so much Latin. But I can appreciate the postmodernism of it. It doesn't go so far that, oh, everything is meaningless, where postmodernists get tiresome because we have to live in the real world, so thanks. But it does point out a lot of things. Are we seeing symbols where they aren't there? Are we making connections that aren't there? You know, doubt everything is the motto here. And so I think they do a really good job of it. So I didn't mind the postmodernists as much. There were some other things that annoyed me because it was written in the 80s, but at the time it's based in Umbertino. I looked this guy up and he is impressive. He is specifically listed as an Italian medieval historian and philosopher before he's an author.
Yes.
So he knows his stuff. He also passed away sadly in 2016, which makes me wonder a little bit if that's how they got the rights to make that miniseries, but...
Oh, that could be true. That makes me wonder, because that's your question, isn't it? What he thought of the movie?
Yeah, if we want to go to one question for the author. My original question, which is why I looked him up, did you go to Catholic school? Because he just understood Catholic history so well that he could explain it in book form.
He's Italian. Catholic history and Italian history are very overlapped.
Yes, but I want to point out, and I thought this was interesting, and this is why I'm bringing it up. Yes, he did go to Catholic school, specifically one that was of the St. Francis order.
Oh, no wonder he made him very heroic looking in his book. He did seem to favor them.
He did seem to favor them, and he seemed to understand them way better and stuff. And so, yes, he did go to Catholic school, specifically a St. Francis one.
So your new question, though, is what did the author think of the movie?
I really am curious what the author thinks of the movie.
Because it makes me think if they made a miniseries soon after he died, maybe it was because he didn't really want anyone else to make a movie about it. And now that he died, it was more open to that happening.
I'm just really curious because there are plenty of authors. Agatha Christie was vocal. Not all authors are vocal, but Agatha Christie was vocal. I don't think she liked any movie that her characters were in. She just hated them all. I'm just really curious because he went out of his way to very specifically choose a postmodern tone, and he has it all throughout the book. It's very masterfully done. It's very carefully crafted. And I just feel like the movie takes that and is like, that's cool, and then chucks it to the window to make it something that people would watch as a movie. I feel like the movie did him dirty. Rating. Watching a series for one character out of 10. That's what I felt like I was doing a lot of the book. It would change who that one person was, but sometimes I was reading the book just for William, or sometimes I was reading it just for this character or that character, or sometimes just for the mystery itself. But that's how I felt.
I would give it a rose out of 10.
It means nothing, but it means something because we give it meaning.
Exactly. I think it's going to be whatever you make it. Some people might not like the book. Some people will like it. I think it's one of those books that could have a lot of meaning if you put a lot into it.
Some people will look at it and think it's a true pinnacle of what it stands for, and some people will think it's overrated.
Yeah, so 1 rose out of 10.
Read again. Probably not.
Yeah, it's kind of long. I agree with your assessment that if I had to go through it, like if I taught a class, maybe that's a question for me. Would I teach a class on? I would love to teach a class on this book. I think it's very rich for critical analysis, but I would do the thing you mentioned. I would use the chapter headings to skip parts and just get to the parts I know I want to read.
Yeah, so I hate them while I'm reading, but in the concept of rereading them, I kind of like them.
Yes, they are convenient because you'd be like, oh, this is the chapter so laments about love for that peasant girl. Skip.
I go to the monastery and have a conversation with Umberto. Skip. Anything with Umberto, honestly.
Which, actually, the sad part is, if I did teach a class about this, those would be the chapters I actually reread, because I'd be like, well, this is where I need to do the critical analysis in. The boring, long-winded one.
Yes, it's very rich. I'm glad I read it once. It's not necessarily 100 books you should read before you die, but it was an experience that I'm okay that I had. But have you read this book? What's your favorite book that was later translated into English? Give me all of the Bourne books, all of them.
Ooh, I could give you a few.
I could give you a few.
That's true.
Anyway, do you have any book recommendations for us? Tell us all about it in the comments below. If you like the video, hit like, and if you're enjoying yourself, hit subscribe for more. Thank you for exploring The Name of the Rose with us. Join us next time when we'll be covering Majesty by Catherine McGee. I'm Sam Reiner.
And I'm James Reiner.
And we hope to see you and a friend here next time. Escape With Me Book Club is a Lunar Skulk production. Check us out on TikTok or Instagram to keep up to date with us. Lunar_SKULK.